I did a survey not too long ago in my community tab about the worst advice given by other hikers or the auto stores. When it comes to the advice given in the stores, most of them were related to boots instead of using trail runners because of ankle support and staying dry. While the ones from fellow hikers could be stuff like, you absolutely need to bring a gun. These two we will not talk about today, but 7 others will be addressed. And I will hopefully also try to give some better advice than the ones given to my viewers at the time. So stay tuned for an episode filled with bad advice and hopefully some good ones. I believe we all have been given bad advice at some point, and maybe we gave a few ourselves. All in good faith, of course. But it is important that we learn from them and try to give better advice next time. Now we have 7 of these bad advices to talk about, so let's get to it. Our first bad advice is that a 2R value sleeping pad are good enough and safe for 3-season hiking. And just like he also pointed out, is that people are used to sleeping in their bed with like 20 in R value all year around. So why go as low as 2R to risk hypothermia or just to be cold and miserable? Bad advice? Yes. Or maybe. It all depends on where you live, because we gotta remember that and have that in mind when receiving any kind of recommendation. Here in Sweden we often talk about temperatures for 3 seasons to be like from -3 degrees to +25 degrees Celsius or something. But at other places they could have like +10 C as the lowest temperature, so to really understand the advice given, you gotta know their reference. You also need to know if he or she is a warm or a cold sleeper, and in what category you are. And as a reference, if someone asks me what R value pad to choose for 3 seasons, I try to recommend 2 different ones. A 3-season pad for a warm sleeper, minimum of 3.5 in R value, and for a cold sleeper, a minimum of 5. And that will take you down to about -5 degrees Celsius at the minimum in ground temperature with no problems. For warmer conditions you will do fine with an R value of 2, but if you want to buy only 1 pad for 3 seasons, I believe my recommendations to be a good start for you to know what to look for. Our number 2 is that lightweight gear isn't good enough for the Swedish mountains, or any mountains for that matter. This was an example and a recommendation from one of the biggest auto stores in Sweden. I don't want to mention the name, but this is quite a common opinion for them not very interested in ultralight gear. I would like to sit here and say that they are completely wrong, but they are not. And let me explain why. When it comes to backpacks, rain gear, shoes, pads, sleeping bags, cookware and clothes, they are all wrong, 100%. But when it comes to tents, there is a little bit of truth in it. Not all ultralight tents are good enough for the mountains and the more exposed areas. But that is also true for other tents that not fit into the category of ultralight. No matter if it's an ultralight tent or a heavier one, teepees are the best performing tents in higher wind, and if looking for an ultralight tent to bring for these kind of conditions, here are a few good options. Teepee tents like Bonfus Midus, Hyperlight Mountain Gear Ultra Mid, or Mountain Laurel Design Solo Mid or Duo Mid, or Trek and Post supported tents like Top Tent Stratospire and Dan Durston's X Mid series. This is just to mention a few good tents ready for action for the more exposed areas. But remember that if it is too windy, don't pitch your tent in a too exposed area and try to find a more well-protected camp spot. Our number 3 is that there is no need for a personal water filtration kit, use the group. I love hiking in a small group of people, but that doesn't mean I rely on them to support me for something as important as water filtration or any other gear for that matter. All the guys I'm hiking with always bring a full kit to be self-supportive, and according to me, that is great because then we will have backup if something happens. This covers everything from tents, cookware to first aid kit, fuel and water filtration. Lucky for the group in the story behind this post was that the one who made the post brought his filter anyways, and then had the possibility to supply 13 people with water for 2 days. Next time they might not be that lucky. The bad advice number 4 is that sleeping naked is warmer than sleeping with clothes on. This is perhaps not bad advice, but an old myth or an old truth. And that is of course not true. Adding layers inside your sleeping bag or quilt is a good way staying warm. My quilt has a comfort temperature rating of +3 degrees Celsius if I'm sleeping with my base layer on. If I then also add a fleece and later on also down pants and a puffy, my new comfort rating is then -2 degrees. sometimes lower and sometimes warmer, depending on the moisture content in the air. This way of layering makes your gear set very flexible. Sleeping naked is nice, if it is warm enough, but it is not warmer than sleeping with clothes. Myth busted. The number 5 of bad advice given is that you need 2 socks to avoid blisters. Again, not true, but it can help. The idea is that you will get the friction between the socks and not your skin, so less friction against your skin means less blisters. So long, so good. But a lot of friction also happens between your toes, and for that 2 pair of socks doesn't help much, or not at all to be fair. 2 socks is also warmer, and warmer feet means more sweat, and more sweat means more moisture and more friction and higher risk of blisters. 2 socks are mainly used in boots and especially non-lined boots, and for that they are great. For boots with a liner or trail runners, you can just as well use only 1 pair for that, and I do recommend using toe socks for less friction between your toes and less risk of blisters. Now, beside the general recommendation to use 2 socks in non-lined boots, it is also a good thing if you have toe spreaders. Then you can have a toe sock liner with a toe spreader on top, and on top of that the oversock. This way the toe spreader will stay in place. 2 socks aren't a bad idea generally, but normally you would do fine with only 1. The number 6 is the sleeping bag temperature ratings, and that they are most of the time bad advice and not true. But to be honest, I haven't had much problem with this, and the sleeping bags and quilt that I have owned have been pretty accurate. The quilt I have from Cumulus is said to have a comfort temperature of about +3 degrees Celsius, and I find that to be accurate even as a cold sleeper. Sure, I sleep much better if the temperature is above 5, but that is mainly because I'm a cold sleeper and I hate being anything else than warm. And maybe that is the reason and the real problem, that most of us, or at least them new to hiking, don't know if they are a cold or a warm sleeper. So just because the manufacturers say that a bag has a comfort temperature of +4 degrees doesn't mean it is accurate for you. And we got to remember that the comfort temperature is the one to look for, where a standard woman is comfortable and are not feeling cold in a relaxed posture. Limit temperature, also called the transition range, is where a standard man is in a situation of fighting against cold, curled up inside the sleeping bag but not shivering. Not all manufacturers show the comfort temperature, and not all bags are tested according to the EN ISO standard of testing, so be aware of that when comparing bags and quilts. Anyways, my recommendation is to go for a bag or a quilt with a slightly higher comfort temperature than the temperature expected, and at least 2 degrees higher. This because if it is raining and if the air has a high moisture content, the bag will accumulate a bit of water and get damp and lose a bit of its insulating properties. And because it's a better idea to be a little bit too warm and open up the bag slightly than to be cold and miserable. Our final bad advice, and bad advice number 7, is there's no need for rain gear on this hike. It's gonna be sunny the whole trip. This is of course just bad advice. You should always bring rain gear and to be prepared. At least that is what I recommend. But then of course I have no experience hiking in the desert, and maybe that's the only place where this is applicable. I don't know. Please, you guys who are a desert hiker or used to hike in these kind of conditions, do you bring rain gear? Please let us all know by leaving a comment. Now I hope you enjoyed today's episode about the bad advice given, and that I could deliver what was promised in the thumbnail. If not, or if you have anything to add, just leave a comment and I'll come back to you as soon as I can. Now hit like, subscribe and turn on the notifications so you don't miss out on any future content. And I hope also to see you again next week. But for now, bye bye.